All right, welcome. I am honored to be here with Graham, and his life's work's been bringing together quantum physics and Buddhism. And but there is a warning: this is not a New Age talk. This is going to go very deep. I'm going to try to keep up with Graham, and he's written many books. His first book is Quantum Buddhism, and he's releasing a new book now, which I want to talk about, around David Bohm, one of my favorites. And on that note, I'm going to bring on Graham and ask him to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. Okay.
Right, I'm on now, am I?
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, we're recording.
Right, okay, that's good. Well, I mean, my background is very mixed. It's a bit odd, really, because my life has been a mixture of the sublime and the ridiculous. So, because of my books, I had one person actually email me to say he thought I must be enlightened. And I said, if you actually knew my history, you would realize that that was so untrue. But yeah, my life has been weird. Like, I always knew I was going to write a book, and I always knew I was going to write a book about philosophy. And even when I was in my early teens, I thought the world was weird. I used to look at the walls of my bedroom and think these shouldn't exist. Where do they come from? I thought people were weird. I thought houses were weird. The whole thing just didn't make any sense to me. I used to wander around having premonitions of death, thinking, why the hell were we here? In fact, if you think, a lot of the questions in my mind were lamb-rim questions. Of course, I would spend days going through questions such as, why are we alive when we just die? It's completely pointless. I'm working to live, and then I'm living to die. And then when you read the lamb-rim, you think, well, I was thinking this when I was 13, but I didn't know anything about it, obviously, at that time. But I always felt drawn to the East. And this was before this kind of hippie stuff. This was when, I think this was in my early teens, so I don't know, early 1960s. I wasn't aware of the hippie trail or anything like that. But I was aware that the world was a very weird place. Because I was quite good at mathematics, although I didn't realize it, I automatically went on to a university to study mathematics, but I didn't like doing that because I wanted to study religion. I didn't know why. I just knew that it was my role in life to study religion. But so because Essex didn't have any religious studies department, I moved to the sociology department. Quickly discovered that sociology was really not a particularly productive endeavor, and I switched back to doing mathematics. And I very quickly liked mathematics, and also I studied physics in my first year as well. I had A-levels in physics as well, so my background's in maths and physics. But I always wanted to go on to study religion at some point. So I got my degree in mathematics. I got a 2-1. They thought I'd get a first. I also studied philosophy of psychopathology as well with a guy called Frank Cioffi, who was a Freud basher. Didn't like Freud for good reason, but we won't go into that. But so that was, that enabled me to study philosophy in the context of psychopathology, which was interesting to me because I was in psychotherapy. Now here comes part of the ridiculous bit of my life. I was in psychotherapy because I suffered from hay fever. However, doctors had diagnosed my hay fever as being due to my mother not loving me. Now,
Due to what?
Due to my mother not loving me.
Okay.
Now, throughout my life, I have been in doctor's surgeries almost in states of attacking them physically. I didn't, but I've been in doctor surgery trying to explain to them that in fact I was suffering from acute hay fever, and they have resoundingly, up until about 10 years ago, stuck to the original misdiagnosis. And I met somebody who was a doctor, who was also a Buddhist, but he told me, the problem is you got misdiagnosed at an early stage as having a borderline personality disorder. And once you're diagnosed with a borderline personality disorder, nobody would take anything, no doctor
Right.
would take anything you say seriously. You will not be listened to, even though the first doctor got it wrong. But yeah, I mean, when I was doing my master's degree, during the summer, I would go out in this is important actually, I'm telling you this, I would go out out of my room, and within 30 seconds of being outside the door, my throat would be on fire. Mm. And I say this, it isn't, you know, some people think, well, hay fever is just a bit of a stuffy nose. No, it's not. Severe hay fever means you feel as if you are terribly, terribly ill. Your throat feels as if it's on fire. And I couldn't figure out how the hell I could cope with this. So I went to the doctor and said, no, these symptoms don't exist. The only explanation is your mother didn't love you. And I spent whole summers in bed convinced I had flu, for example. I would not go outside. Hence, it took me a long time to get my master's degree. How did I get my master's degree, you may ask? Alcohol. One day I went down the pub and I had a few pints of Double Diamond and suddenly my life transformed. Drink enough alcohol, pain disappears. So basically I became an alcoholic, so-called alcoholic, very quickly. I learned to drink enough every day to control the pain. I also went to psychotherapy because I said, well, so many doctors say it must be down to my mother not loving me, and they say I need psychotherapy. Well, they are doctors, they must know what they're talking about. So I went to psychotherapy, and it's significant because I'm an alcoholic, and I mean, I drank a lot. I went through periods of my life where I was purely engaged in research, maybe mathematics, physics, philosophy, Buddhism, whatever, and also periods of my life of utter insanity. I was on the streets of Brighton drinking bottles of cider, for example. And I got involved in some very unpleasant situations, which you would not expect somebody who writes about Buddhism and considers themselves to be a Buddhist philosopher to have got themselves into. I've been stabbed in the neck, for example.
Wow.
When you have to drink vast amounts of alcohol, even just to actually kill severe pain, it's very easy to find yourself caught up in very weird stuff going on. I can't remember, this was after I actually went to Sussex University. I should say that prior to all this happening, I had my drinking under control. And I went to Sussex University when a girlfriend of mine went down there to study. She went down to study philosophy, Wittgenstein. And I discovered there was a Hindu woman called Pratima Bose, who was head of the religious studies department. And I knew a lot about psychology and religion because I read voraciously. And I got an interview with her and I said, I want to study religious studies. at MA level, and I went to see her, and she interviewed me and said, well, Graham, you know, ordinarily we wouldn't take you because your degree's in mathematics, but you know more about this stuff than most of the people in our department. So obviously I must take you, but you're very lucky because most people wouldn't take you. So it was only because of meeting Pratima Bose I was accepted to do an MA in religious studies, although my first degree was in mathematics. And it was there that I studied mainly Buddhism. When I studied texts on emptiness, I knew all about it. It's kind of weird. You read this stuff, said, oh, I've met this before. Oh yeah, I know about this. And quickly, I was teaching a course on science and Buddhism quite quickly. There was these things called art science courses where scientists were introduced to philosophy or something. And again, because at that time I was writing a thesis called A Self-Referring Universe, which involved mythology, science, quantum theory, Buddhism, and also, and Alan had connections to Routledge, Kegan Paul. They sent my thesis off to Routledge, Kegan Paul, and a guy there said this was the most important book of religion of the 20th century.
Wow.
We must publish this. I had the letter somewhere, but I lost it. But anyway, so, but weird things happen, you know. I mean, it was the middle of summer. I was drinking probably 2 or 3 bottles of wine a day. I mean, this is a time where I'd go and meditate and then go down a pub and be drinking very strong lager. And after 4 or 5 pints, would still be explaining the intricacies of my Jamaica philosophy. People were trying to figure out how I could possibly do it. You can teach yourself to use alcohol as a painkiller.
Well, as you know, also, like Milarepa and many of them would practice drinking alcohol and keep themselves in their mind, in the, you know, the clear light mind.
Yeah, well, whatever. I could drink alcohol, and it was like a clear light mind. To me, I ended up in a treatment centre in Brighton, and as part of my rehabilitation, I went back to meditation. And one night at the meditation group, I sat down. I was feeling a bit tired, and I sat down to meditate. And suddenly, I saw in absolute technicolor Tibetan mountains in front of me. Tibetan plain, Tibetan mountains, and then these yellow-hatted figures just appeared above the mountains. And it was as if there was a cinema inside my mind.
Wow.
And these Tibetan figures in yellow hats, you'll notice them in Manjushris, of course, surrounded me. And then I saw this in bright technicolor. So it was a cinema screen. And
sorry, and this was 2 years ago, or this was when you were previous?
No, this is about 15 years ago.
So this is before you wrote your first book?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. This was just before. Prior to this happening, I was thinking about writing a book about zero. The mathematical concept of zero. It was just an idea in my mind. Wow. I want to hear about you. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but I just wanted to get the context. This is before you wrote your first book.
Well, this is how I ended up in the treatment center.
And then you were meditating and you said you saw the Gelu.
Okay. So all these Manjushris surrounded me, and then I saw a bowl of nectar, orange nectar at my heart, and then these streams of nectar, channels of nectar came out up to the hearts. And so I had all these channels of nectar, bright red nectar, going up to the hearts of the Buddhas. And I was just thinking, And of course, I was on no drugs, no alcohol, because I'm a treatment centre. And over my eyes, and the channels of nectar are still there, going up to the hearts of people in the meditation room. And then the vision faded. And I didn't say anything about it because I didn't want people to think I was taking drugs or something, being at a treatment centre. But no.
That had never happened to you before, anything like that?
No. I was absolutely astonished. Then about a week later, I went into a bookshop in Brighton, and I was perusing this book. On the shelf. And I looked at it, and a voice said to me, "You have to buy that book." What? And I kind of thought, that's odd. Went to move away, and the voice said, "You need to buy that book." So I thought, fair enough, it's not that expensive. So I bought it. This is actually another copy. The other one I gave to someone else a while back. But so I bought the book and put it by the side of my bed. And when I started reading it, I was astonished to see the meditation vision that I had is in this book. You think, what? So now, thinking about David Bohm talks about his ideas of the implicate order, how events which happen are always encoded at a deep level of reality and will be triggered in future points in time by surrounding circumstances, which of course you can see corresponds to yogacara immediately. There's karma, vipaka, the actions and their consequences. But the idea is, that especially events which have great deal of psychic energy will be recorded with greater depth to resonate across lifetimes even. But Bohm doesn't go into that. I do. I explain how this must be the case given Bohm's ideas. But this is an example of the implicate order functioning,
Explain what you mean by that. Like, how did the implicate order give you that vision and then tell you to buy the book? Like, how do you explain that?
Well, the first thing to realize is I ended up going to a place called the Bodhisattva Center, which actually is at the top of a road just above the bookshop. And whilst at the Bodhisattva Center, I'd be telling people about these experiences, and they'll just say, well, of course, these are imprints from your previous life. And also I remembered I had a kind of past life regression at some point where some kind of Hindu mystic woman said that I had been a mystic in the previous life. I'd been a Buddhist adept in the previous life. I didn't think about it at the time. But I mean, this actual vision is very close to a vision Tsongkhapa had.
You're talking about the nectar from Tushita Heaven. Yeah, I'm very familiar with that. And I just want to share too that I had a similar experience with the Kelsing Gyatso book too. I was, because I received the Vajrayogini initiation and I was looking for an understanding. And he has a book, I think it's called Guide to Dakini Land.
Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
And it was like in a vision, it was like basically buy this book. I had a similar feeling. And he's a controversial teacher. And I was nervous even to buy the book at the time, but I'm glad I did.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, he's got, to my mind, we discussed this, is controversial because in the West, he's the only person who's trying to preserve a pure lineage.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you think the lineage is correct or not, I mean, that's what he's trying to do.
Mm-hmm. No, I
think
yeah.
he's the only person who really teaches the Lam Rim as it actually was taught. But we discussed this, but I mean, we'll go into that.
It's in the, so you, okay, so after you had that vision and read and started reading, did you start reading?
Well, the other thing is that one of the visions also is you can have in this book is about, it's also connected to a vision that Tibetan yogis would use as visualizations prior to writing Dharma books. Within a short period of time, I went to stay at the Bodhisattva Center, and I had a great time. I loved it there. And I was reading a lot of Buddhist texts there, and I started reading stuff that I read at university when I was doing physics and maths, like Bohm's. And whilst I was reading this stuff, I realized very clearly that there is a deep connection between the idea of the ground consciousness, the Ilaya Vijnana, and Bohm's notion of the implicate order. It's just obvious to me, you know, just why hasn't anybody seen this? And I started reading a lot of what was available at the time, like Alan Wallace and so forth. Alan Wallace's books are brilliant, but again, they don't go into great detail. And what I found was that there were excellent books there around. One was Victor Mansfield, another Buddhist practitioner who was also a physicist, who wrote, I can't remember the exact title of it now, he wrote a book about, you know, emptiness. But they didn't go into great detail.
Mm-hmm.
Or rather, they didn't give precise analysis. There were, and because of this, people who wanted to repudiate or refute ideas that there's a connection between Buddhism or spirituality and quantum theory could easily do so because of the lack of detail in the books which were available at the time, you know. So I think Peter.
That's why back in the golden age of Buddhism, if you were to put out, you know, like garbage material or something, you would you'd be embarrassed. You know, you would have to like wear it around your. You know that story where you have to like wear your.
Yes, I do know.
Nowadays, anyone could put out a book, and it could sell, and there's no one really checking. So that's where you came in with your first book, Quantum Buddhism, right? You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the idea I realized basically what was essential was to do some real detailed research in this area. Now, my background is in, I have a degree in maths. I studied physics up to first year university. So that stuff is no problem to me. I'm not a new age, you know.
So what did you discover?
Will get refuted. So
is the book Quantum Buddhism, is it mostly on the Yogacarya view with the Ilaya?
No. It's mostly on Madhyamaka.
That's what I thought.
At this point, I didn't, because I was at, you know, the Kadampas were Gilugs.
Right.
So, you know, Kelsey Gatsu is a Madhyamaka.
No, I mean, I went through the same exact path that you did. Started with the Gelugs, started with the hardcore Madhyamaka, or Tsongkhapa's version of the Madhyamaka. And then I, you know, after 10 years of that, and refusing to look at other lineages, I slowly I slowly, because you feel guilty. but I'm really grateful I did. You know, I started with the Nyingma, and then the Kala chakra opened up a lot because of it's so obviously, you know, Jonang. It's really closely related to the Shentang view.
Oh, Jonang is Shentong, isn't it?
Well, I mean, Jonang is Shentang, but when you look at the Kala chakra itself, even though the Gelug's interpret it to be Madhyamika, it really is such a great case for Shentang, or they interpret it to be Rangtang, but it's really a Shentang Tantra.
Yeah. I mean, you hear people think, you know, philosophers in the West think they're the bee's knees, and they kind of think that Buddhist philosophy is somehow, you know, somehow fuzzy. It's just astonishing, the arrogance. Western philosophy is dismal.
It goes back to like Aristotle. I mean, that's how. I mean, it starts off at Aristotle. We wind up with Descartes. You know, and the book Debate in Tibetan Buddhism, Daniel Perdue, at the end of that book, he has a great critique, comparison between Buddha Dharmakirti versus Aristotle. And it's a brilliant case for that is where everything went wrong. You know, we could talk, let's do a whole show on that. But so that book, can you summarize Quantum Buddhism, that book? I mean, it's available on Amazon.
600 pages.
Yeah, it's available on Amazon, right? If people want to purchase it. So, okay, is it like the traditional study of the tenet systems, where you're like the Lamrim approach, where you're starting with the Abhidhamma?
I mean, it has a chapter which goes through the tenet systems and how you can relate that to quantum theory, like the Vibhashika is pure atomism and so forth. And then you've got the Svartantrika, which is basically how that imprints on the mind, so forth. Then the Chittamatra. It goes.
That's awesome. Give me a few examples then. Instead of summarizing it, give me a few examples of how the Madhyamika or the Yogacarya tie in with quantum physics.
Okay, right. The first thing to understand, the reason it's 600 pages is because I studied everybody. Now, one of the things which really irritates me about the new agey type, you know, the more fluffy books on this, they do not understand the subject they're talking about. Now, I've got one guy I told you about, Paul Levy. He's actually plagiarized my work. And because he doesn't even understand it, while he's plagiarizing me, he even gets it wrong.
Yeah.
Because these people are not capable of, say, understanding Wojciech Zurek, who is one of the decoherence theorists, because they haven't got a scientific background. And what I realized I could do was actually, because of a mathematical scientific background, I could understand papers, original papers, and I could go into them in great detail. And I studied everybody to go through. People say, oh, I can't read this. Oh my God. Because it goes through everybody. It goes through all the great Buddhist philosophers, and it goes through all the great discoveries in quantum theory in great precise detail. Now, one of the things as I said, I wanted to be precise. And I'll give you two examples of precise discoveries, which I will say I made through rigorous, I mean, it took about 10 years to write this book.
Wow.
What is the definition, the main definition of emptiness within Madhyamika? If you want a logical presentation of emptiness in Madhyamika, it is reality is neither existent, nor non-existent, nor both, nor neither. So it's non-existent, it's not non-existent, it's not both existent and non-existent, nor is it neither existent or nor non-existent. These are the four, this is catastrophic, the four extremes. And what's being said here, this is the existential nature of the ultimate sphere of reality, according to the Madhyamika. So the idea of the Madhyamika actually says there's nothing there, is wrong. It's absurd. And one of the things when I used to wander around, the Bodhisattva Center, some of the ordained monks would be saying, "Oh, Madhyamaka says there's nothing there." No, it doesn't. He says there's nothing substantial there. It doesn't say there's nothing there. Things in ultimate reality, even Kelsang Gyatso has once said, things do exist, but only just.
Yeah.
Brilliant. But the ultimate nature is neither existent nor non-existent nor both.
So explain that in quantum physics. How does the quantum field, because okay, so let me just, for the audience, the quantum field is, or would you equate the quantum field with the implicate order, or the implicate order?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. That's
Jean
good
Brickman, who's written Sense and Nonsense in Quantum Theory, and he derides quantum mysticism for good reason. He talks about, there was a famous rugby player, that's what he has a chapter called Quantum Rugby, because there was a rugby player who famously said that he understood spirituality once he'd read quantum theory. And John Brickman says quantum theory is the only scientific theory people could possibly make the absurd claim that they now understand, the spiritual nature of the universe. But anyway, and the thing is, I like reading books by these naysayers, by people like Brickman, because you understand where they're coming from.
Of course, you got to see both sides.
Brickman says in one of his books, Sense and Nonsense in Quantum Mechanics, whenever somebody says to you, well, Buddhist philosophers discovered quantum theory 2,000 years ago, you must ask, where are their equations? Now, the first thing you can say to this, well, actually, nobody has ever asserted that Buddhist philosophers came up with Schrödinger's equation. The only claim is they understood the metaphysics that goes along with Schrödinger's equation. They don't understand. They never put forward an equation. But in this example, they did put forward a logical claim about the existential configuration of, as you say, a quantum field. Because
so let me ask
in the case that the Buddhist philosophers were right, that the ultimate nature is neither existent nor non-existent nor both nor neither, then we must be able to find something like this applying to quantum fields. And you can. And again,
okay, before you explain that, okay, so existent, non-existent, both and neither, you're saying that that you could find that in quantum physics, that
yes.
Those four, that and I want to ask you, the quantum, does the everyday world, the implicate order, constantly unfold moment by moment from the quantum field? So the quantum field
the implicate order
itself
is the quantum field. The implicate order is like
so the quantum field. So there's a quantum field where everything we experience, from people to buildings, everything arises from the quantum field.
Yeah.
And so the quantum field itself has the qualities of these four. That's what I'm trying to get this one question out.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'll let you take that over.
So of doing this kind of research on the level, on the detailed level that I was doing it, is the aha moments when you come across in a book of quantum theory by, now here's a book by a foremost Italian quantum physicist, Giancarlo Girardi.
Hold it up a little bit.
Sneaking a Look at God's Cards.
Okay.
Wonderful book.
Quantum mechanics.
And the thing about this, he is another anti-quantum mysticism guy. And he actually says in his introduction, I've written this book so we can give a kicking to these idiots. He actually says, I'm not going to leave any room for quantum mysticism. He says that in his introduction. Little did he know about Madhyamaka. Because, here we go, how can it be understood that attached to these potentialities, that's the quantum potentialities, is a non-epistemic probability that in a subsequent measurement of position, the chair will be found here or there, which is equivalent to asserting that before the measurement was carried out, the chair could be neither here, nor there, nor in both places, nor in neither place. That's exactly the Buddhist catasquatting.
Right.
He's talking
so
about...
he talks in that book, he brings up the four, or the, what is it called,
Yep.
the quadramaton. He discovered that.
And he doesn't even realize what he's saying. Yes, indeed. Quantum particle, before it is observed, must be in a state of neither being here, nor there, nor here or there, nor neither here or there. He says that in this book.
Incredible.
I thought, what? But I'd worked it out, you see, because prior to being observed, if you say, suppose you've got a quantum particle could be spin up or spin down, doesn't matter what spin is, then it must be root 2 spin up plus root 2 spin down, which means it's called a superposition of both. But if you look at what a superposition really is and analyze it mathematically, you'll find it means that the object is neither here nor there, nor both here and there, nor neither here and there.
This is before it's observed.
Yeah.
Okay, can you explain? So where does the observing come from? Where does consciousness also come from the quantum field and observe? Does it split instantly, like the Yogacarya kind of says, or are you saying that
this is where the controversy resides, because there are those who say consciousness is involved and those who say this is mystical nonsense, of course.
Well, they would all agree that awareness, right? No, not all of them. Okay.
No, Brickman, for instance. This is why David Bohm's pilot wave theory was greeted with such joy by some people like John Bell, because David Bohm had two phases. His first phase was a realistic phase, and his next phase was an idealistic phase. If you look at something like we won't go into in great detail, not necessary. Basically, if you look at the two-slit experiment, which a lot of people know about, it looks as if, a wave of probability goes through the slits. And if you observe which slit the wave goes through, then it becomes a particle. And if you don't observe, so you don't know which slit it's gone through, then it doesn't become a particle. It becomes it stays as a wave, and you get this interference.
Yeah.
Inside. Okay, so this is the famous wave particle duality that Niels Bohr came up with. And Niels Bohr kind of said, well, we can't really say what it is beforehand, but it's kind of a wave, but then it becomes a particle. Niels Bohr was very cagey about what he really meant, which is why a lot of people get very upset with Niels Bohr. They think he's a bit of a kind of, double-dealing Eastern mystic, really. other people thought that maybe we can't really say what the quantum realm is like prior to measurement, you know. However, Niels Bohr certainly seemed to introduce a subjective element. Prior to doing some kind of measurement, we don't know what's out there.
So that's what he was.
Einstein was a man who did not like.
Exactly.
Bohr.
I was just going to say. Bohr, you saying introduced the subjectivity into it?
Some people accuse Bohr.
Right, but he's the one who made.
Bohm wrote a book in which he gave a very good exposition of Bohr's subjectivist view.
I see.
And Einstein was not happy.
Right.
So Einstein took Bohm, David Bohm, aside and said, listen, I'm not happy with this. We've got to get rid of all this subjectivism in quantum theory. And there were a lot of people, John Bell as well, was another physicist, they did not like, and in fact, they did not like having an unreal world becoming a real world just because people measured it.
Right.
Einstein, one of the things that Einstein really didn't like was non-locality, but that's another issue. But,
well, let me ask you, if you don't have the observer, if the observer is not affecting how the quantum field converges into our everyday reality of people and time and space, how do they explain it? How do they explain how the quantum?
There's an explanation or an interpretation called decoherence.
Okay.
And the idea is and this is putting it very crudely,
please.
When quantum fuzziness meets, sort of concrete stuff, the concrete stuff of the classical world tames quantum fuzziness to behave properly.
But where does the concrete stuff from? Isn't it supposed to?
This is the obvious point. Well done.
Exactly.
They don't push it back far enough. You got to say, well, okay, but at the moment of the Big Bang, there's only quantum stuff.
Right.
So how does this concrete stuff get going in the first place?
The materialists, they're always trying. They don't see their blind spots with the material. No. It's such a blind. No. Okay, so let's forget about them now. Let's talk about.
This is why it's an incredibly interesting subject, because you can see people's philosophical prejudices functioning in the interpretations they make.
Absolutely. I mean, not just quantum physics. I mean, everything.
Yeah, but in quantum physics becomes very clear, like John Bell, and it actually, the interesting thing, for instance, Einstein went to David Bohm and says, look here, son, I want you to sort this out. I think David Bohm was known to be a very good mathematician. And he said, look, we need a more realistic interpretation. Stop with this subjectivism.
So let's talk about the subjectivism, though. That's the more exciting part.
This is important.
I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. We get to subjective stuff. What's important? David Bohm really found that he could massage the equations into another form. This is very interesting. Prior to this, in the early days, there were two forms of equations used, there's Schrodinger and Heisenberg, and they seemed very different. And then I think it was either Pauli or Dirac shows they were actually mathematically equivalent. But when you look at the different maths involved in Heisenberg's a kind of Madhyamaka quantum theory, and Schrodinger is a Yogacara quantum theory.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Because basically Heisenberg's got these kind of little matrices of possible outcomes, which then hit another matrix of possible outcomes, and then you get your outcome. Whereas, but they're kind of hovering between existence and non-existence.
So would you say Heisenberg he accepted the subjective influence or no?
No, Heisenberg, yes, Heisenberg did.
He accepted it. And who was the other person you meant? Dirac or the other one? You said there was two.
Schrodinger.
Schrodinger. Was Schrodinger? He was obviously very subjective.
Schrodinger was less enamored with subjectivist viewpoint.
He was right. He was the one who says that you observing the cats is what has an effect on.
Well,
yeah, break that down. Break that down. Is it our eyes observing something?
No.
When they say observe, what do they mean?
But this is the problem. The problem is, and again, it's taken me some time to sort this out. The problem is this. First, know that the New Agers love the idea that I'm going around sort of creating my material. Zing, zing, zing. I'm producing material reality with my consciousness. No, not true. And this is where this is where your serious kind of more hardcore quantum physicists get really upset, because they do come out and say, look, I create my own reality. If I want another car, I'll just dream it up, this kind of stuff. It's just not true. In terms of quantum theory, if you really analyze it, it makes far more sense when you realize that a primordial consciousness is creating you and the material world at the same point.
Okay, so what's the primordial consciousness?
It's just his primordial consciousness. It's what Dzogchen would call primordial consciousness, neither existent nor non-existent, nor both nor neither.
So is that equivalent? Is that equivalent to the quantum field then?
No, primordial consciousness is the internal cognizant quality of quantum fields. Now, of course, physics cannot see this internal cognizant quality. It only manifests in quantum experiments. So the point is, if you set up the experiment in a way so that you see which path is taken by the particle, shall we say, what you're doing is setting up the experiment with your participation in it, in a way that you're observing primordial consciousness, creating a tiny part of reality. And it's only because your narcissistic egocentrism that you think you've created the particle, but it's not. Because, who's creating you if you think you created the particle?
Well, could you argue if it's one primordial consciousness, could you say that that's you or I?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, in Buddhism, there is no self, and once I've done enough meditation to know there actually is no enduring self.
Well, we just talked about before. Like, it's not that there's no self; it's that there's no enduring self.
There's a temporary center of operations. This is very weird. That one does have ability to make free will decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. But there is no enduring fixed self. Because if there was an enduring fixed self, you wouldn't even be able to make any decisions.
No, I agree with you there.
Yes,
okay,
right,
so not so much a fixed self. We don't have to get into the free will even, but I'm talking about self being an unceasing luminous awareness.
There is an unceasing luminous awareness.
And in other words, there is the ground consciousness. See, this is how I understand it. Let me try to explain it the best I can, because it's beyond self and other. It's beyond single and multiplicity. So the primordial consciousness, you can think of it as one thing, but each one of us, it's almost like a tapestry or like Indra's net. It's one net.
Yeah.
And that thing, we think, most people think of this one consciousness as being a centralized God mind, but it's really just this infinite mind. And each one of us is like a nodal point on this. And if you, like you said, the ego slows your frame rate down, your perceptual rate down. So you get caught up in you get caught up in your own conceptions and you break away from it. But if you're achieve the ultimate, Dzogchen goal, Mahamudra goal, you are like the primordial consciousness. You identify that you are just a nodal point on this, and you don't grasp onto anything. You don't grasp onto anything from being separate from the field.
Yeah.
So in that sense, there's a self to the field, and there's a self to us, not a self, but an awareness. Okay, where are we going with this? So okay, let's go back to what you said. So you're saying that there is eternally these two things. There's the quantum field, and there is observers or awareness of the quantum field. There's two things.
Well, the point is, rather than the problem with the New Age presentation is it's got this idea somehow that if I want to manifest, you think you walk through walls if one had, just by beaming consciousness at them. If you really can, and in fact, I think there was one guy who he said, well, look, if you really believe that you can beam, consciousness at the world and collapse wave functions, jump out of a 10-story building and collapse wave functions.
Right.
So you land safely.
Well, I guess you could argue that if you master, because there are stories of many Buddhist stories of people. This is the question, and you don't have to have the answer, because this is like, is there two things or one thing? Is there the quantum field? Is there a primordial consciousness? Or let me backtrack, because I like the Yogacarya expression. They say that, because if you look at our experience, right, phenomenologically, the one thing we can say for sure is not I think therefore I am, but I am subjectively experiencing phenomena, right? If you get to the bottom level, there's no subject-object duality, but that subject-object, it goes to the amoeba, it's just so built in. So what they say in the Yogacarya, what Asanga says is that wisdom at the deepest level, it's wisdom observing suchness. Suchness is the objective pole, wisdom is the subjective pole, so that it's two but one. What's your take on that? Like the primordial field, is it consciousness, is it quantum, or is it just the two of them combined, and it's just inconceivable with language, with conceptual mind to imagine, where basically matter and consciousness are one?
Well, my conclusion, the simplest way one can explain this is that the process of reality consists of an immaterial field, which is neither existent nor non-existent, nor both nor neither. It is not existent, but it's not non-existent either, of potentiality for experience. And the quantum field contains infinite pools of possible potentiality, incomprehensible pools of potentiality for experience. It contained every possible experience that anybody or any being could have. Also internal to the quantum, this overarching quantum field, is an internal cognizant primordial awareness. Because of its nature, cognizant nature, it must actually function to unravel those potentialities to produce an illusion of a dualistic world. It's like a reflex event, which is necessitated by the internal cognizant pressure of primordial consciousness. And that produces, infinite numbers of sentient beings having interconnected experiences. However, those experiences are ultimately illusory, which all schools of Buddhism would assent to, but it doesn't mean they don't exist, but they don't exist substantially. And upon enlightenment, beings see directly into the illusory nature and directly experience the qualities of primordial consciousness.
Yeah, I think that is the difficulty. We're trying to describe things that that you can't even understand until you're enlightened. But and I like what you said about experience, right? I think that is the main thing. Like, you have mind and body, subject and object, but I think at the common ground is experience, right? Is that what the quantum field really is? It's a field of experience or potential experience.
Yes.
And then mind and body, subject and object, arise out of that experience.
Yes.
Yeah, I think of it like that too, in the sense that the unfolding, right? Let's talk next time about your new book and about the enfolding and unfolding universe. But my take on it is, it's not actually unfolding in an actual sense. It never changes. It's more that it's more like it's moving, and the illusory projections are changing.
Well, this is precisely what Bohm calls the hollow movement.
Yes, this is what I want to talk about next time. Give us a little taste. Give us a little taste of the hollow movement. Explain how this works.
Very quickly, when Einstein said to David Bohm, "Look, I want you to get rid of this subjectivism," what he did, he massaged equations and reduced an equation which actually gave you an image of quantum particles like electrons being there all the time, being pushed around by pilot waves. So the quantum wave became this real, in inverted commas, real wave, meant to be like an electromagnetic wave, but real as, which pushed particles around, okay?
Why would Bohm agree to do that? How you can't massage?
Because Bohm was a Marxist.
What?
Bohm at that time in his career was a Marxist.
So he was a Marxist.
Bohm didn't take much to actually convince him that he wanted a real material world, because he was a Marxist. Now, having said that, later when he realized what was going on in Russia, he realized his mistake. He was a Marxist because
that's fascinating. That's a whole fascinating.
Bohm was a really nice bloke. He wanted to save humanity, and in his lack of wisdom at an early age, he thought Marxism was a possibility.
Well, that's most people. But it's fascinating how people's political leanings it's more deeply rooted in how people view of reality, ultimate view of reality.
Absolutely, yeah.
We could talk about that. Yeah,
Bohm was quite happy to do that probably because of his Marxist leanings.
So then he came to his true self. I know he was hanging out with Vivekananda. He was hanging out with some Swamis.
Krishnamurti.
I think Vivekananda. Oh no, Vivekananda was Tesla. Okay, so yeah, Krishnamurti. Right? And the Dalai Lama. Wait, you've seen the video with him and the Dalai Lama?
Yes.
David Bohm, obviously, yeah.
Yeah. The thing about this is, if you read I've got loads of books about recently published books by people getting on the quantum mysticism, the non-quantum mysticism bandwagon, giving you all the interpretations. Right. And Bohm is trotted out as a realistic interpretation, but it's very misleading, because the problem is, although electrons have positions which are there all the time, lots of other quantum entities or characteristics such as spin become even more weird, and they don't tell you that. They keep that out. Oh look, we know exactly what an electron is, but you don't know. There's lots of other stuff which is very weird about the so-called pilot wave realistic interpretation. It was because of this weirdness that Bohm very quickly realized that it did not work. And one of the major features of the not working was that, whereas an ordinary quantum theory prior to measurement, everything is connected all over the universe in a immediate way. You know, I'm connected to atoms the other side of the universe instantaneously. It's called non-locality prior to measurement, and measurement untangles this, so non-locality doesn't end up in the real world, our world. In Bohm's pilot theory way, non-locality comes into the real world. So when I lift my glass of water, atoms over the other side of the universe start moving.
So Bohm eventually came to reject that idea.
He realized that basically it doesn't work because of these inconsistencies, if you like, and he realized it needed to be extended quite dramatically. And also he rejected Marxism, and he actually says he began to read, you know, Christian mystics, began to read Buddhist texts.
So when did he?
Because in the pilot wave theory meant that the universe is interconnected at all points in the universe all the time. Mm-hmm. This is where he got this idea of the hollow movement. He realized that, in fact, this interconnected movement, or let's call it potential energy, is what the universe is really made up of. Okay, and we are interconnected at the level of the implicate order, which is his term for the quantum field. But he's trying to lift this idea that this interconnectedness is there all the time.
Exactly.
However, sentient beings are projected into what he calls the explicate order, and so they experience the implicate order in a disconnected, separated fashion. And this is where the connection of mysticism comes with, of course, because and he was associated with Krishnamurti, and they began to believe that by certain techniques of transformation of consciousness, you could move explicate experience towards the implicate levels of interconnectedness.
Exactly. No, I love that. And I like to think of it as the, you know, like, I guess the realists, they like to see everything as here. So they see the interconnectedness as a quality of here, whereas the way I interpret, you know, Madhyamika, Dzogchen, is that it's coming from a central point of the now, like a ripple, right? When you drop a rock in the lake, it ripples out. And that to me is how time works. It's always in the middle. And then I guess the unfoldment is like the ripples. And most people are focusing on the outer ripples instead of realizing that the present moment is constantly being enfolded in the present moment. But people, their minds are focusing more on the reflection in the mirror rather than the actual source. So in other words, we're interconnected in the sense that we're all connected. Like if you imagine like there's like some kind of connection to the same source. It's not that we're connected, me to you in the UK. It's more that we're connected to the same central source. But that central source is not just like the center of the universe. It's the center of it's the center of time also. It's the center of the present moment.
Yeah, and
it's
this
not
is
working.
where, I mean, no, because the problem is, and David.
Well, look at the people. The book The Secret came out, what, like 10, 15 years ago? All those people are in the worst place. Like all the people who believe that I don't have to really plan. I don't have to save money. I don't have to take care of my health. I'm just going to believe. I'm just going to write down how much money I want, put it under my pillow, right? Or I put it above your, I mean, that is, no, I mean, absolutely. Obviously I'm 100% with you on that.
And this is not what Bohm is saying exactly what you're saying. We're connected at this deep level, which is what the mystics of all times have said. Right. But because we are separated through karmic, we actually do dig ourselves so deeply into the explicate order. It's not that simple to say, oh, right,
And that's what's that's samsara.
Yeah.
Samsara is, you know, the root of the 12 chains of dependent origination is confusing the implicate order or the explicate order with the implicate order, right? It's that confusion. Yes. All right, let's wrap it up right there. That's a really good point. And